Welcome to the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast
with our mom,
Misty Bailey. Tips and encouragement
for
real-life homeschooling
is headed your way.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 49 of the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast. I am so excited for today's interview with Julie Bogart from Brave Writer. Julie Bogart is the creator of the award-winning, innovative Brave Writer program, teaching writing and language arts to thousands of families each year. She homeschooled her 5 now-grown children for 17 years and is the founder of the Homeschool Alliance, which supports homeschooling parents through coaching and teaching. This episode with Julie is full of lots of wisdom, encouragement, and of course at the end we also talk about her brand new book, The Brave Learner. So without further ado, here's my interview with Julie Bogart. Podcast sponsors make the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast possible. So let's take a moment to learn more about this season's sponsor, Sunlight. Want the best education possible for your children? Reading to your children offers numerous benefits, including more sophisticated language, greater empathy, the experience of living in other times and places, an increased vocabulary, the opportunity to pass on your values to your children, an increased attention span, higher test scores, and a thrilling homeschool experience for both parents and students. Reading together is the best way to learn. Sunlight, spelled S-O-N, curriculum is a literature-rich program built on brilliant books to share with your children. Sunlight covers all subjects and all grades from preschool through high school. Sunlight graduates have gone to prestigious schools, including Harvard, Stanford, and Notre Dame. And these thousands of students have enjoyed their homeschool experience along the way. Want a free trial of what a Sunlight education might look like? Request your own Sunlight invitation, and Sunlight will send a free book and schedule to your door. Go to sunlight.com/joyfully today. Sunlight with an S-O-N for your free trial. Sunlight, the program you're guaranteed to love or your money back. Now, on to the podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast. I am Misty Bailey, blogger at Joy in the Journey and podcaster here at Joyfully Homeschooling. And today's Fess Up Friday interview is with Julie Bogart from Brave Writer. How are you today, Julie?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, I've been so excited about this interview, and I know you've been making the rounds talking about your new book, The Brave Learner, and we are going to have some time here in a little bit to chat about that. But before we get started, can you share with everybody a little bit about you and your homeschool journey?
Sure. I have 5 kids who are now adults. They range in age from 22 to 31. My oldest just got married just a few weeks ago, so that's a brand new experience for us. I homeschooled them full-time for 17 years. Some of my kids did some part-time and even full-time enrollment in high school. My oldest tried part-time enrollment, hated it, and quit. So he was certainly homeschooled all the way through. My homeschooling journey included a whole bunch of experimentation. I tried various philosophies. I read widely. I joined various co-ops and support groups. So I would characterize my homeschooling experience as one of a learning journey about educating my kids and how to connect and parent them.
I love that. I think that so many times when we do start homeschooling, we have in our mind like this one mindset of how we're going to do it. And then as our kids grow, as we go on with our journey, we really do kind of experiment to find out what works best for our kids.
That's right. And in fact, sometimes what I notice is that parents are so afraid of not doing things perfectly, they feel like experimentation is risking failure, which of course, on some level it is. But the nice thing about homeschooling is that you see the results quickly. You can actually pivot at any moment. There's no requirement to follow through on something that is lifeless or not bringing about the results that you're looking for. So the watchword I like to give homeschoolers is experimentation. Feel free to take risks and try things, because that's how you're going to enliven your homeschool.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Okay, so Julie, we're going to jump in and ask you a couple questions all about your homeschool journey, struggles, and fears. And then, like I said, at the end, we will make sure we chat about your book. So are you ready to go?
Totally ready.
Okay, so the first question is, what is one struggle or fear you had regarding homeschooling, and how did you overcome it?
So, of course, I think many of us compare ourselves to the school system on some level. You know, the traditional educational environment is not only in many of our backgrounds, it certainly was in mine, but it's also the cultural air that we breathe. Everybody knows that there is an institutional kind of learning going on at the school down the street with credentialed teachers and certified testing. And so even if we leave that system because we imagine that our homeschool can accomplish things that that environment can't, we're still hoping to at least match up to the results or exceed them, which is a ton of pressure. And so what I noticed is I started out very joyful, playful, connecty, willing to follow rabbit trails. And then one day I was sitting at my children's gymnastics class next to a mom who had kids who were age mates of my children. And her kids were in a private school, and she had in her hands the third grade packet. It was a week's worth of work that she was supposed to supervise during the after school hours at home for a week. And she was rifling through it. And at one point, I just could not help myself. And I asked her to hand me the packet. I wanted to see, what is a typical third grader expected to know that maybe I don't know my kids need to know? And I did the full freak out.
Oh, yeah.
I saw this packet and I thought, oh my gosh, I forgot to teach my kids the Pledge of Allegiance. And we haven't gotten anywhere near semicolons. And what's this, common denominators? I thought that happened next year in fourth grade. I had the full freak out. I looked through this packet. I went home, shame, buckets of hot lava shame pouring over my head, certain I had failed my children. And fortunately for me, I had a really good conversation with my husband at the time, who was a school teacher. He worked in a high school. And he said, Julie, those packets are aspirational. There's no kid retaining all that information. Are you kidding? This is just what the teacher thinks she's teaching. Doesn't mean the kids are retaining it. Which was like a wonderful reminder that just because something is in a book or in a textbook, that doesn't mean students are making meaningful use of it. So I backed away from the scary packet, chose never to look at another one. And the way that I helped myself to get out of that mindset of comparing what we were doing at home to what the schools were doing is I gave myself permission to look at some scope and sequences for that age. Mm-hmm. Now, this is before the internet, by the way. I'm from the dark ages. So I went to the local library and I opened the card catalog and I found a book series by a man named E.D. Hirsch. He has a book series called What Every First Grader Knows, What Every Second Grader Knows.
Yeah.
Yes, and I checked them out. I did not use them as a way to hold myself accountable. I used them for inspiration. So when I discovered, for instance, that second graders learn the song Yankee Doodle Dandy, I thought, oh yeah, I totally forgot that that's something I could share with my kids. And I used those reference points, oh, we're going to read the Song of Hiawatha. That's right. That's a great poem. That gets shared a lot in schools. But I knew that as a homeschooler, I could bring those things to life in a way that they weren't being brought to life by the packet. So I discovered that I could dialogue with the standards without feeling shamed and guilty that I wasn't applying them in the same ways.
Yeah, I love that. I did the same thing whenever my daughter was in kindergarten. We were the first people, like whenever I started homeschooling, there was only, I think, 2 or 3 other homeschoolers I knew in our area. And we also live in Ohio, but we're in Southern Ohio. And I made the mistake of asking my friends, like, hey, what are your kids learning in school right now? But you have that mindset, and you want to make sure they're not behind. But I bought the book. I know which books you're talking about, what every first grader, second grader needs to know. But I bought the book, Rebecca Rupp, Home Learning Year by Year. And it takes you through from preschool to 12th grade. And kind of pulled out ideas, like you said, to kind of get an understanding, but still let our kids enjoy their childhood and not feel that pressure of needing to cover all of these areas, just like the public schools do.
That's right. If you can use that as a menu, if we treated textbooks like cookbooks, we'd be a lot better off. You know how you look through a cookbook, you don't do it in order. You don't feel like you have to cook every single recipe in the book. And sometimes well, my kids hate celery, so I'm just going to leave that out. Or, you know what, I really like using these Moroccan spices. I'm going to add those in. If you treat a textbook like a cookbook, then you can actually enjoy and use it as a resource. Or if you see scope and sequence as, a menu of options, you're much better off than if you see it as this accountability structure that is designed to show you how you're failing to live up to the academic standards of traditional education. So that I love that you suggested that. I was constantly on the hunt for more things to bring to my children, because actually it had been a long time since I was in elementary school. I couldn't remember all the things that would be wonderful to share with my kids. So sometimes it was just a source of inspiration for me to page through things like that. But I first had to shed my anxiety that somehow I was failing my kids because I wasn't living up to those ideals either. I had a different agenda than the schools.
Oh, yeah. And we leave the school environment, but yet compare ourselves to the public schools all the time. It's messed up.
It is. I mean, that's the problem. If you are leaving the system, you also have to leave their criteria of measurement. Otherwise, get in their system, because they do their system really well. They're going to get out of you what they are designing the system to produce. You decided when you homeschooled, I don't think getting good grades is the measure of an education. I don't think performing well on tests is the only way to know if you've actually learned something. So if you really, truly believe that, if that's why you brought your kids home, then you get to dump those systems of measurement and only use whatever they use as inspiration for your custom designed home learning environment.
Yes, that's so true. Okay. All right, Julie, the next question. What is your biggest homeschool regret?
I think my biggest regret would have to be that sometimes I allowed myself to control the environment instead of paying attention to my children's needs. This happened in fourth grade when my oldest son was in fourth grade and his younger sister was in second. I have 5 kids, so there were 3 little ones running around the house or laying on the floor waiting for a diaper change. And I felt this need to impose structure on our days. I was feeling like I had been too loosey-goosey. This was the it all counts now moment, fourth grade, got to get ready for junior high. And so I purchased 2 teacher lesson planning books, one for my son, one for my daughter. Now remember, they're fourth and second grade. I got a whole bunch of colored highlighters, yellow, pink, green, orange, and I matched a color to each subject area. Then I planned out their days each week with those color codes, page numbers to complete, workbook sheets to finish, activities and enchantment that we were going to plan to match up, because I wasn't a brutal textbook mom. But I was trying really hard to organize and systematize our learning environment. Because I am one of those moms who loves connection, I even wrote margin notes, things like, won't it be fun to learn fractions? Like that would make up for it. I had little stickers all over this lesson book. And I shared these with my kids. I let them wake up each morning. They would put a sticker when they completed the assignment. Now, my daughter, the second grader, she's a little more of a systematic kid. So she found some pleasure in checking off the assignments. But at the end of 3 months, I went to wake up my son, the fourth grader, my oldest child, one morning. And he woke up and his first words out of his mouth were, "I hate my life."
Oh, no.
Yeah. And it's that moment that you realize, whoa, he didn't even just say, I hate homeschool or I hate math. He was providing me with a summary judgment of the totality of his experience. And I was a wise enough person at that point to know you take this seriously. You don't just brush it off or call it laziness. This was important. I needed my child to love being alive, not to hate it. And so I pivoted in that moment. I suddenly saw with great clarity that systematizing learning was definitely not the way he was going to learn. And I even saw the limits of it for my daughter, who was starting to be trained to think that if she checked everything off, she was done with school for the day, as though learning fit between these hours of 10 and 2. And so it was a moment for me to really pivot away from that. So that would be my chief sort of regret, is that I tried to systematize what had already been going well. I got doubtful and I, adapted to this more scholastic style of learning, and I had to come back out of that.
Yeah, I think that a lot of us fall into that. I think that also goes along with, the public school mindset. We feel like if there's no structure, if there's no marking off of the checklist, then they're not really learning.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So Julie, this next question before we get into talking about the book is one I ask all of my podcast guests. And that is, how did you find joy in your homeschool day?
Well, I have this principle that when everything is going wrong, you can rescue any homeschool day with something I call poetry tea time. It's the pairing of reading poetry with setting a beautiful table, maybe even lighting candles or creating a centerpiece, bringing out maybe your favorite mugs or the china you never use or teacups you bought at a thrift store, pouring a delicious liquid into those cups, serving something yummy to eat, anywhere from orange slices to brownies to muffins, and then paging through all the poetry books that you checked out from the library, hopefully 40 of them, not just one per kid, but way more than you could possibly read in an afternoon. Sitting at that table together, slurping, paging, eating, and then suddenly finding a poem and saying, hey, I want to read this one. And you read that poem aloud, whether you are the 4-year-old who picks it out and asks the mother to read it, or you're that 8-year-old just starting to read, or you're 15 and you're reading lyrics from your favorite music group. But using an opportunity to gather, to eat, to read and share without any academic agenda. For me, that created the most momentum in our weeks. It was something we could always return to. In fact, my 5 kids all went on to have a meaningful connection to poetry as adults. My son Jacob was a resident assistant at Ohio State. On a boys' floor, he took multiple teapots and poetry books with him to college and hosted tea times in his room. It was a real girl magnet, by the way. I had a son start a poetry slam at his college, and it became the most well-attended student-led activity in the school. I had 2 daughters join online literary magazines where they contributed poetry and edited other people's works. So when we look at this, what creates joy, in our family, it was finding a way to celebrate learning in a cozy, comfortable context without any pressure. And poetry tea time is just emblematic of all of that.
I love it. So this is actually, it worked out perfectly that you said that, because this is kind of going to segue into the next question and you didn't even know it.
Okay.
So it was a podcast interview. I think it was the 2nd episode with Deshelle McVeigh. And I know you know Deshelle.
I do.
Well, she's the first person that ever introduced me to poetry tea time.
Ah.
Yes. And she actually is the person who introduced me to Brave Writer. So I will have to thank Deshelle. And I love that you said that, because I knew kind of what you were going to say going into that, because that's one of the things that she talked about too. And she actually encouraged us to start using poetry in our homeschool, because, confession, we had never done poetry at all.
You're not alone. Most people are afraid of poetry. It's very common. Yeah.
Yeah. So it segues really well into this, because as I was going through your Brave Learner book, the first question I had was, what would you say to someone totally unfamiliar with the Brave Learner process? Because I heard so many people like Deshelle say that it was so much more than a curriculum. It is a lifestyle. So what would you say, like, to me, who before Deshelle had never been introduced to Brave Learner, what would you say to that homeschool mom?
Yeah, so we use the language of Brave Writer is
Brave
my
Writer.
writing company. Yeah, and we call it the Brave Writer lifestyle. And the reason is I really was recognizing when I hit that wall where I was trying to systematize learning into some kind of schedule, I realized that actually sometimes the best learning moments happen in our family in the least anticipated times, like on the drive to the dentist or in the bathtub on Saturday night when one of my kids spontaneously retold an entire fairy tale. These are the things you're looking for between 10 and 2, and they don't always show up there. And I started realizing I needed to give my children and myself credit for sort of this ongoing journey of learning that was happening in the 24/7 cycle, not just during the quote school hours. I began jotting things down in what I call a scatter book. It's basically a journal, but I just had no way to meaningfully organize categories because my insights about what was going on in my family were sort of coming fast and furious. So I would just jot down things they said, quotes I read in books, moments that were happening around me where I could see this learning activity bubbling up. And then those notes helped me improve for the future, but they also reassured me on the days when I thought, oh my gosh, we are doing nothing. We've done nothing for a week. And then I look back at my notebook, well, that's actually not true. So when you are embarking on shifting your lens from learning as school that you do to your children, I'm asking you to sort of expand the lens to learning as your lifestyle already and simply taking note of it. I'm not asking you to even do things totally differently yet. Just putting your own imagination on alert and paying attention, you're going to be shocked at how much good stuff is already happening. And as you get in sync with noting that and seeing it, you will start to have some inspiration about how to enrich and enhance it. Let me give you a really good example. So I have a daughter who was very much into American Girl dolls. And we spent time, playing with them, getting their trousseau. And at one point, these special dolls that were sort of international dolls with their own storybooks was suddenly available. I think those have been retired now. But my daughter's parents, me and her dad, have both lived abroad, traveled abroad. He was a Peace Corps volunteer. I served in a sort of a service capacity in Central Africa. So we've had a lot of conversation about international things. And all of a sudden, because of that, her interest got piqued in these dolls and their books. So we strategized how to save money for them. We purchased them. We read the books aloud. But this was not a school plan, right? This is American Girl. This is a shopping in a catalog.
Right.
Buying a doll, reading a book. I did not try to make that even tie into history. It was what some parents in public school would have called enrichment. But for us, it became a learning journey. And that daughter wound up being a linguistics major in college and mastered Hindi and 4 other languages. And I like to think there was a correlation there, but it wasn't like in a lesson plan. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it absolutely does. I know we, my girls were huge American Girl fans, huge. And they're 14 and 12 now. And so I'm making them keep all of the books and the dolls, for my grandkids.
Right, exactly.
But they loved reading the books and learning through them. And yeah, we tried, we did some American Girl history co-ops a couple times and kind of pulled out lessons from the books and kind of did a fun day with their friends. But I always thought in the back of my mind, I was like, this is totally school. We could really make this into this big thing. But I also was terrified in the back of my mind also of the minute I tried to turn those books and them loving those dolls into school, they would have just completely cut them off.
That's it. That's exactly right. The reason poetry tea time is so powerful in families is that poetry is a prestige subject. You know, if we said we were doing comic book tea times, it would not be as popular. Parents would not see that as valuable, even though, side note, do a comic book tea time. Your kids will love it.
Yeah.
But we all know poetry is a prestige subject, just like chess, just like violin, just like Latin. These are subjects that we all look at and say, oh, academic-y, right? When I paired it with tea and treats, what we do is we meet a child's need for enchantment, for fun, for play, and we pair it with a parent's neuroses around academics. And we bring those two together and everybody relaxes. They are invited in. They start to see poetry through a different lens, that it's approachable, accessible, something to enjoy and value, not just something to conquer and get graded on. And that's true across the board. So some of the best learning, the best educational moments in your family will not happen within your typical daily routine of home education. They are squirting out the side. They are coming from Legos or video games or playing cards or, you know, taking care of the pet rats. You will discover that those things actually give you greater access to the school subjects when you start valuing them. And that's literally what the Brave Learner is all about.
Yeah, and this goes well with another thing that I had got from your book. So we have always done this thing called Flex Friday. And so what our Flex Fridays are is we normally do book work like Monday through Thursday. And then on Fridays, we would leave that day open to kind of exploring interests or doing those projects that you don't really have time for through the school week. My girls do a co-op, and so they've been doing speeches or debates in their co-op. So they kind of, and then they can do it on whatever topic they want. So they spend that day working on that. And we've done that for years. I love Flex Friday, but I have added to Flex Friday, thanks to you and to the Brave Learner book, with this wall of questions.
I love it.
So yeah, so we have a wall now, and it was really interesting because in my mind, I kind of thought I would know what my kids are going to put on their Post-it notes and put on our wall, but I was going to let them do it anyway, just to kind of prove myself right. And they blew me away with the questions that they had wondered, the things that they wanted to learn about, because they were really, really in detail. And I think that sometimes we forget that our kids do have all of these other interests outside of what we call school, you know, and I love that, the Great Wall of Questions. So can you kind of do a brief summary of what that is and how you talk about that in the book?
Yes. So one of the reasons that this notion of asking questions became important to me to include in the book is that I get asked a lot by parents, how do I facilitate these big, juicy conversations you talk about in your family? We're introverts, or my kids don't like to talk that much, or I don't know how to initiate a good conversation that goes further than a yes, no, or I don't know. One of the ways that we do that is we need to stir up a raging curiosity. If your kids are used to answers being the most important feature of your learning experience, they have not yet developed the skill to ask great questions. So I recommend that you take a space like a sliding glass door or a whiteboard or a wall that's blank in your house and provide it with Post-it notes and a bunch of markers, hopefully the kind you can wash off the wall. And you just, for a week, write down literally every question anyone asks. Now, obviously, questions like, what is a black hole? How far is Earth from the sun? I wonder how to find X in an algebra problem. These sound like the kinds of questions I'm talking about, and many of those will go right on the wall. But I also think it's important, anytime a question is asked, that it goes on the wall, like, how soon is Hanukkah? Or why does Joseph get the blue toothbrush when I asked for it first? Or Mom could write, you know, why won't anyone help me clean up the living room when I'm asking nicely? You know, any question goes on the wall. And for a week, resist the temptation to provide answers. If someone asks a question, say it goes on the wall, you know, unless it's important information like, yes, get your shoes on, we have to get in the car in 10 minutes, you know, if the question was, when is the dentist appointment? But the bottom line is, we want to include as many questions as possible. We want to encourage reading the questions and adding new ones. Like, let's say you read, how far away is the sun from the earth? And a child comes up and says, well, now I want to know how far away Mars is from the earth. You could create a nice overlapping chain coming down the wall of questions. And then maybe someone would write under that, why did they name that candy bar the Mars candy bar? And then someone else might say, why are candy bars so sweet? So it doesn't mean that they all stay in the same category. It could spring from the initial thought and it could transition. The goal then is on a Sunday night, have dinner together and just start peeling off the questions and discussing them over dinner. Now, you don't have to find answers, but you might. Answers are pretty inevitable, but conversation is absolutely the goal. And sometimes these strains in families even get handled much more nicely in this neutral format. So if somebody has an issue, like, why can't I have the computer 4 hours a day? It seems unfair that, my sister gets it more than I do. Well, now this comes up in a context where the heatedness has been dialed back and you can maybe have a conversation about it. So the bottom line is, to tie it all together, when we are looking for a way to learn, learning is provoked by good questions. Academics, PhDs, anyone who is growing the knowledge base in a field gets there because they ask questions, not because they already know the answers. So we're trying to stir up a raging curiosity in our kids.
Yeah, and I know whenever I gave the kids the Post-it notes, and I was like, I want you guys to write down some questions. They were like, what do you mean? Like, they wasn't sure. And in my mind, I've always felt like I've raised kids, we love books, we talk, all of that. But I thought that they would have all of these questions, more questions than what they could fill the Post-it notes, but they didn't. But that first day, they each wrote out a couple questions, and then throughout the week, they've added to it.
That's perfect. And honestly, we don't want it to turn into an assignment.
Right, exactly.
So I would even go first as a parent, put some of your own questions on the board, but you can also catch them in the act of a question. So they come to you and they say, what time's dinner? And you're like, a question, let's get that on the board, like that. Because the danger is when you hand a child a Post-it note stack and you say, put a question on the board, they go numb, they go blank.
Yes,
I would too. So it's
put
staying
them on the spot.
alert. That's right. Staying alert to when the question naturally erupts, and then you having the foresight to say, that sounded like it had a question mark at the end of it. I'm going to stick it on the wall, like that. Just start to notice the questions. And if you get to the end of the week and there are 3 questions on the board, well, that tells you something too. Maybe we are a very answers-focused family, and we all have to grow our capacity to ask questions. So the next time you're reading a nonfiction book with your children or you're watching a television show, keep the Post-it notes handy, and why don't you add your own questions? Now, I'll give you an example. We used to watch movies together with our kids, my kid's dad and I. And as the movie would be going along, John would suddenly pause on the remote control. And he would turn to everybody and he'd say something like this, what do you think is going to happen next? In the middle of the movie, before we know, everybody would guess. Then we'd go a little bit further and he'd be like, who are you rooting for? And everyone would pause and say who they're rooting for. And we'd say, but why? Why aren't we rooting for that guy? And then they'd explain why that guy's the bad guy and she's the good guy. And then we'd say, well, how did the movie help us know which was good and bad? Can we trust it? Do you think this is really true? Like that. We start modeling inquisitiveness, right? It's not just about the big questions. It's why do we process things the way we do? And in our family, we had a raging, big, juicy conversation about Disney movies, literally for their entire lives. It's still going. It's not over. They're all in their 20s and 30s now, and they still have opinions about Disney movies because we've always been inquisitive about them. We dig a little deeper. Instead of saying, this is the protagonist, this is the antagonist, why don't we just start with, how do we know who to root for? Right. And why are we rooting for them? How do we know who the bad guy is? Like that.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so I have a few more questions. Are you still doing okay on time?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So the next question I have is, so in your book, you talk about your art table in the corner. Now, I'm a type A mom, which is, there's going to be a question about that here in a minute too. And the thought of the art table gave me chills. So how did you get over the fear of messes and glitter and all of that stuff?
Well, I actually have a chapter in the book all about messy houses because I think we have been so conditioned now, particularly through social media, to create homes that look idyllic, almost as though we know natural learning is happening if we use a farm table and we have, French doors that we can look through that have unfinished wood or something. There is this notion that natural learning looks somehow a certain way, like a catalog picture. And what I hope parents start to realize is that creativity in thinking, I'm not talking about art right now, I'm talking about this inquisitiveness, this curiosity piece, requires the willingness to sit with the distress of things not being tidy.
Yes.
Whether it's untidy thoughts, untidy creativity on an art table, or untidy writing while you're trying to figure out what you really want to say about the Civil War. Part of all of home education needs to embrace that messiness. So for the actual logistical side of the art table where you're putting it in the center of your room, I do give some guidelines, ways to protect the space, make sure that you have a rug underneath it or a floor underneath it that can handle glitter spills. Maybe don't put out glitter. Maybe put out things that you're not worried about initially and save glitter as that turbo boost that you only do once in a while when you can support that activity. The goal isn't necessarily to change your personality, it's to grow your tolerance for taking those risks at least once in a while. I know some families in extremely small spaces use those IKEA carts and they put all the supplies in there so that they can roll it out when they have the ability to tolerate the mess, and they can roll it away when they need a break. They need to clean up. They need to have their sight lines clear. All of that is wonderful. The key, however, is making sure that you are not only scripting the times for creativity. There needs to be access for children to trust their curiosity to lead them. If they can only be creative and curious under strict conditions, they have less access to it.
Right. They feel like they're almost under a microscope.
Correct.
And yeah, I think it's a process for, I know whenever I first began homeschooling and my kids were young, I ran a daycare for 7 years. And I remember when they would come out and I was doing my teaching license and they came out and the person who did my evaluation marked me off for points for having the paint in a locked up cabinet. And I remember thinking, well, what am I supposed to do? Just have the paint out all the time? Like my dining room is carpet, And at the time, I just thought it was just silly. But as my kids have gotten older and as I have educated myself more as a mom and went through this as a homeschool mom and went through this whole learning process myself, I think we get better as we get older. At least I feel I have. But I think also it's important to almost, I don't want to say, I'm trying to think of how to explain it. It is important to let ourselves go and to just, like you said, don't script art time. Don't feel like you have to constantly follow this schedule and this script and this perfect, ideal scenario for learning. And I think we have to kind of just let ourselves go sometimes and let ourselves embrace our kids and the creativity and the learning process.
True. And I think you'll find as a parent that when you let go of those reins a little bit, the resulting delight in your children is the payoff.
Yes.
You will actually have some of the satisfaction you've been seeking. I don't know about you, but no matter how neat my house is, it just doesn't ever hug me.
Right.
It might look good for a little while, but relational intimacy is what brings the greatest rewards. So keep that front and center, and I think you'll be able to tolerate some mess.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was friendship. So I love the friendship that you talked about with Dottie in your book. And we all need those homeschool mom friends. I have had so many moms through the years tell me that they don't have those type of friends, though. They can't find them. Maybe they live in a rural area or in an area where homeschooling is not as common. What recommendations do you have for them to find moms that can come alongside them on this homeschool journey?
Definitely use the internet. I mean, that is really critical. My very, very best friends in my life don't live in Cincinnati where I live. So it is possible to have an intimate connection with a friend who supports you, who is online. And you can find each other either by joining a Facebook group or Instagram and starting to just take that risk and reach out to people and start to create a bond. I know for me that in the early 2000s, I was a part of a group that became so close. We still know each other through Facebook. There was no Facebook back then. I started my own discussion board and they joined it. And at the time, it had over 100 people in it. 40 of us still know each other and 20 of us are still very close all these years later. And none of us live in Cincinnati except me. So it's possible to find homeschooling friends to travel this journey with. You just got to risk putting yourself out there a little bit. In terms of in-person connection, if you don't have a local friend or a local support group, turn these internet friends into in-person relationships once in a while. I'll never forget the very first time I flew on a plane to visit someone I only knew from a discussion board. She and I both decided we wanted to go to the Art Institute in Chicago. So we set up a weekend to meet there. And interestingly, this is before the internet had avatar pictures. So we had no idea what we looked like, and neither of us had cell phones. So we literally set up the date in like year 2000. And I was like, I'll be on the couch with the green book. And she's like, I'll be on another couch with a red book. And that's how we found each other. And we spent a weekend going to the art museum, eating lunch. You know, she lived in Nebraska. We weren't going to have an in-person relationship, but that weekend still to this day is one of the highlights of my whole life. It was such a treat. We had such a deep dive in friendship and in our homeschool shared experience. And to this day, we're still friends. So I recommend taking some risks, including the internet people in your life, and making an effort to do some in-person experiences, whether it's a conference or a one-on-one that you plan together.
Yeah, and I love that. I know two things stand out in my mind when you said that is of course, with blogging, you meet so many people online and you feel like these people are your BFFs, even though you've never met. But there's been a couple times that we've made the effort. Like I drove to Cincinnati to meet a friend who had a daughter the same age as my daughter's. And we got together and went ice skating and the kids hit it off. We then went to Washington, D.C. all together. And it's nice seeing those online friendships also spread out to your kids and them having friends also. Some of my girls, they text some of my blogging friends as daughters or other kids. And they really do have that connection. But my current Dottie, reached out to me online. She somehow Googled, I don't even know exactly how she Googled it, but she somehow Googled homeschool groups in Southern Ohio. And I started our homeschool group here and my email came up, which at the time was kind of freaky, but she sent me this email and I was at camp and I'm like, well, who is this person that's just randomly emailing me? But at the time, my daughter was going through a really hard time with friends. And she gave me the list of her kids and her daughter was the same age. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a risk. This person might be completely crazy. I don't know, but I'm going to go ahead and invite her over to my house because her kids are the same age. And since then, we have been living this homeschool life together it's been about 4 years. Our kids are best friends. And that would have never happened had she not Googled me and reached out to somebody she didn't know. And then if I wouldn't have also opened up that door and that risk and let her in. So I love that advice that you gave.
Awesome. You're exactly right. And our kids also form relationships online. I remember when Jacob was really into playing Halo on, the Xbox, and he became friends with a kid in San Francisco, California. And we happened to be going there for a vacation that summer. So we set up a time, and this mom and son met us at Ghirardelli Square, and they spent the entire day with our family. And Jacob got to make friends with this kid in person. So there is something real about these online connections. We don't want to just dismiss them. I mean, always do due diligence. We did. We made sure these were real people. But the point is, they can be very nourishing. We don't want to diminish that. Yeah.
Yeah, particularly if your child has this interest that nobody they know personally has. Like my daughter's interested in model horses. Like she does YouTube videos on model horses and this whole Breyer horses thing. Nobody else she knows has that interest, but she's found some people online that I've known their moms that she's connected with. And that's very important to her, to have somebody that understands.
Love it.
Yes, that interest. So absolutely. Okay, so Julie, I have one more question.
Great.
So, okay, what do you say to moms like me, the checklist moms who know the importance of interest-led learning, but struggle with the am I doing enough syndrome and the fear that we will miss something? I know I've come a long way, but I know I could do better in this area, particularly as my kids enter into those high school years. So what kind of advice do you have for us?
As you are looking ahead to high school or beyond, I would love it if you would take this quote that my son Noah said to me to heart. I wish I had learned this sooner. I was freaking out about college requirements. He did not want to go a traditional path at all in high school. He didn't take 2 years of foreign language. He did not study chemistry. He barely got through the biology lab. He was not interested in U.S. government. So many of those, requirements that supposedly are necessary to get into college. And one day he said to me, Mom, you raised me in an unconventional way, and now you want me to be a conventional student?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that sort of stopped me completely. And then I said, but Noah, what if you want to go to college? I feel like it's on me to make sure that happens. And he says, if I want to go to college, I will want to do those things, or I will do them when it's time, but I don't want to do them. And I don't know if I want to go to college, which felt very scary for me with my oldest child. I was afraid it would set a bad example for the other kids. His dad was a college professor. I had a master's degree. We were all about college. We only knew the academic life. That for us was the future. Fast forward, he took a year off after high school was over and then decided to go to college. And at that moment, when it was time to prepare this transcript, he said to me, well, I guess we're about to find out whether I should have taken chemistry or not. And I was convinced that he was not going to get in. This would be the just reward, like the punishment for not having listened to the wisdom of his mother and father. And before I was willing to spend $100 on the application to the University of Cincinnati, I went ahead and called the admissions office. And I told them about his non-traditional education. I told them that he didn't do 2 years of foreign language. However, he had taught himself Klingon, and that he had studied linguistics and constructed languages with 2 PhD research students, one in Romania, one in Australia, online. And that he had read about 10 books on constructed languages. I also told them that he did not take chemistry because he didn't want to. Here's what the admissions officer said to me. Well, what department is he applying to? I said linguistics. He goes, oh, they won't care about chemistry. That's not interesting to them. And they will love Klingon. So put that on the transcript.
Oh my
and then make sure you attach a book list of all the books that he read, because that will interest them. And make sure his essay describes his passion for linguistics. So we did all of that. And sure enough, he was accepted to the University of Cincinnati's linguistics department on the strength of Klingon.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I love it.
And here's the crazy thing. And I will just add this because you wouldn't expect this to be the outcome. He quit. He did 2 years for his major, didn't want to do the gen ed, went back 2 other times to college to study computer programming, quit both of those, and today works as a highly paid computer programmer downtown. Best paying job of anyone in the family. No college degree. I just want that to sink in. Noah did it on his terms the whole way. Were there some lean years where he was working like as a garage attendant Oh, definitely. He had to teach himself the skills he needed for the career he has, but he's always known that he can because he was homeschooled.
Oh, I love that. That is such an encouragement to those of us who have kids that maybe don't want to follow that traditional path. Thank you, Julie, so much for sharing your wisdom with us. I have thoroughly enjoyed talking with you. Now, I want to give you the opportunity to share a little bit about your book, The Brave Learner, and also the book tour you have and the conference that you're doing in Cincinnati, right?
That's exactly right. Yes, I would love to share about that. So the Brave Learner is sort of that pedagogical template of everything I feel like I've learned and understood about home education for the last, 20 plus years. And I put it all together in a sequence. I decided to use what I call the 12 superpowers of learning as the architecture of the book. So each chapter has a way to see things differently than you currently do, followed by something I call the stage the home, how you actually put it into practice. Because before you can put something into practice, you actually have to understand the principle with a fresh perspective. So every one of the chapters has this balance between shifting your paradigm and putting it into practice. Because of that, I hired an agency to design for us a professionally designed companion guide, which you can download absolutely free of charge. It's on thebravelearner.com. It's 92 pages. It's color. It's bullet journaling. I know the millennials love that. So we designed it in a way that would be delightful to use. You can share it with friends, download it for yourself, get it printed if you want. And because of that, my goal right now, whether on Instagram or in my coaching community, the Homeschool Alliance, or in your own groups, you form a little group of several moms. My goal is for you to actually read and practice, not just read the book, get inspired, and then not know what to do. So the Brave Learner is really dedicated to action, not just new thinking. The other thing then that I realized is I'm getting to travel and speak all over the place, Canada, New Zealand, Alaska, like all over the place. Actually, not Canada yet. I was meaning to say California. Anyway, California, New Zealand, Alaska, Florida, all these different places. But I realized I wanted to have a party in my own city. Mm-hmm. So we decided to host a day-long conference in Cincinnati, Ohio. You've been, isn't it a fun city?
I love Cincinnati. It's within driving distance of me, and I don't fly, so I love it.
Oh, perfect. Well, Cincinnati has so much to offer families. There are great museums, and there's the aquarium, the Reds baseball. There's just a lot going on here. So we're hosting it here in this gorgeous hotel downtown called the Renaissance, mm-hmm. and we are going to spend a day really deep diving into those practices and ideas, and I will enrich your experience of the Brave Learner lessons. And then you'll be there meeting families and other moms and dads who are like you. So we welcome anyone who wants to attend. There's details on thebravelearner.com. The early bird special expires March 31st. So you would want to sign up now. And we do have discounted room rates at the hotel as well.
Yeah, I have a friend who is a local friend near me who is a huge fan of yours. Her name's Taryn. I'm going to give her a quick shout out because she's like super excited about this conference. So
love it.
Yes, I know that it is going to really, really encourage a lot of moms. So I can't wait. So Julie, it has been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us here at the Joyfully Homeschooling podcast. So you have a great and wonderful day.
You too. Thanks for this chance. It was a delight talking to you.
Yes. Have a good day, Julie. So what did you guys all think? I hope this episode encouraged you and you were able to walk away with tips that you can implement in your homeschool to cultivate an environment for learning and creativity. A couple things that stand out to me after my interview with Julie and also after going through the book, The Brave Learner, is really to encourage that love for learning with our kids. We have loved the Great Wall of Questions. That has been a wonderful addition into our homeschool. And also, through the years, I have really, really begun to embrace learning as a lifestyle. I talked about this some in my episode, The Biggest Homeschool Regret. And I think that too often times with homeschooling, as Julie and I discussed, we really get in this mindset of checklists and public school and what learning is supposed to look like. And we don't take the time to really embrace the desires that our kids have and the interests that our kids have to learn. And I really love that Julie lays out step by step exactly how to cultivate that environment for learning in her book, The Brave Learner. So I really encourage you to check it out. I will leave a link to the book in the show notes. And also registration, early bird registration for Julie Bogart's conference, The Brave Learner, ends March 31st, and this episode is coming out right before that date. So if you are interested in going to her conference in Cincinnati, Ohio, be sure to head over to theBraveLearner.com and grab your tickets. I live near Cincinnati. I'm unfortunately not able to go to her conference. My daughter has Horse Bowl that weekend, and we will be in our busy camp season. So we will not be able to go, but Cincinnati is such a beautiful city. There is so much to do there. Take your kids, go enjoy the weekend in my home state of Ohio, and get to know Julie Bogart at her Brave Learner Conference. So that is it for this episode of the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast. I hope it encouraged you all to head out there and have a more joyful homeschool. Have a great and wonderful day, guys. Thanks. Bye. This has been an episode of the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast. I thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please take the time to leave a rating or review on iTunes or whatever platform it is that you use to listen to this podcast. That tells the powers to be I'm not talking to myself. Also, hit subscribe. Then you will catch every episode of the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast each week right there in your podcast feed. You can find show notes and more at joyfullyhomeschooling.com and clicking on the episode number of the episode you are looking for. Thanks, guys. I hope this podcast encouraged you to head out there and have a more joyful homeschool.